All right, thank you. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our May indoor meeting virtually. Before we get started, if we have any new members who are attending for the first time, or if we have any guests, please introduce yourself on the chat. And welcome, and thanks for attending this meeting. Without further ado, Mike, would you like to do the honors?
So Mark is an amateur astronomer and photographer, and he is based near Salisbury, England. It is a stone's throw from Stonehenge, a place I've always wanted to go. And he's got a passion for observing the night sky. He started actively observing just by using a pair of borrowed binoculars when comet someone's gonna have to help me. Is it Hayataki? I hope I said that right. Crossed the sky back in 1996, and now enjoys using his own equipment from a garden observatory. His astronomical interests include high-resolution lunar and planetary imaging, deep sky sketching, and binocular observing, and of course, all with a nice warm cup of tea. Mark also occasionally writes for Astronomy Now, enjoys visiting dark skies and star parties in the UK as well as overseas, and writes too infrequently on his own blog that you can check out at www.refreshingviews.com. So without further ado, Mark, thank you so much for joining us this evening for us. A very, very early morning for you.
Yes, it is. Yeah, well, thank you for having me. Right, I've got to work out then, if it's over to me, how to share my screen.
Yep.
Share screen, so I need to project that. So I'm just pressing all the buttons now. So I want to share that screen. Right, so you should start seeing the pictures come through now.
Yep, we can see.
Can you see that?
Yes.
And you can hear me okay? So I'm good to go.
Yep.
It's one of the things about doing virtual meetings now. Of course, it's very hard. I find very hard speaking, online. It's obviously very different atmosphere than when you're obviously speaking face to face. Okay, well, so thank you. Thank you very much for having me speak to you tonight. It's a real pleasure to be speaking across the airwaves and to have the opportunity to describe how we do astronomy in the UK. And this is by no means a detailed academic presentation. It's deliberately kept lighthearted. It's hopefully it's going to be entertaining. So I guess you guys, it's still the 28th of May for you. And I'm going to update my slide because it's now 12:30 at night. It's now the 29th of May for me. It's now Saturday morning. And I'm going to talk a little bit softer because my wife and children are actually in bed at the moment. So I'm in strict instructions to try and keep noise down a little bit. So hopefully you can hear me okay. If I don't, just let me know, just holler and I'll adjust accordingly. So you asked where I am. I did a Google Maps flight from Raleigh across to Salisbury, and that's where I am in southern England. So you guys are at 35 degrees north and I'm at the dizzy latitude of 51 degrees north. So I've got my pot of tea because it's the middle of the night, and it's also only a few weeks from midsummer. So we're almost at limited astronomical light at the moment as the sort of midsummer comes along. Right, so this at the moment, just to introduce myself then, is my grab and go setup. So I've got a roll-off roof observatory in the garden, and in there I have a second-hand Celestron C11 in my observatory. And I must admit, having an observatory is absolutely wonderful. It's one of the best astronomical purchases I've ever done. It's so convenient. It takes me longer now to make a cup of tea, to find my keys, put my coat on, than it does to set up. And more importantly, when you're tired in the small hours of the morning, I can be back in the house in 5 minutes, dust covers on, roof back over, locked down, and I'm back in the house. Now, I don't know what it's been like on your side of the Atlantic, but over here we've had a few lockdowns. We've had children studying from home as well as us working from home, and having a warm room in the observatory has been an absolute godsend. But my family actually wanted to put the hot tub in the observatory. They thought they could roll the roof back and they could sit out under the stars in their hot tub, and of course they could use the warm room to get ready to get changed. So I put my foot down and said, no, it's going to be an observatory. And can you believe it? I mean, my optics would fog over in no time if I had to share it with a hot tub. So that's my telescope. It's a Celestron C11 secondhand from someone in the club, and I'm actually imaging Venus in the sort of late evening there in the background. I think it was about April, May time last year. It was still daylight, and it was a bit like the alignment at Stonehenge. I had that little gap between the trees when I could see Venus, so I had to time my exposure just right, and you can see Venus on the laptop screen in the background behind the counterweights. And that's one of the aspects of being further away from the equator than you are. We get these very long summer twilights. Conversely, when we visit family up in Northern England or friends in Scotland, it's really noticeable how light it is in the summer, and conversely, how dark it is in the winter with those different times of year. So that's the montage I made of Venus last year, and it was quite cool to be seeing this planet. You know, it's obviously got a dense atmosphere of carbon dioxide and sulfuric acid, and there it was hanging in the evening sky over a period of, well, several months. And I was showing this to a friend of mine at work, and it's amazing when you think Venus is on the far side of the sun. It's yeah, the globe's pretty much full, and obviously it gets closer and closer to the Earth and undertakes us on the inside, and you get that narrower and ever larger crescent. A really beautiful sight, catching Venus in the evening sky. And that was a good rehearsal because I, as you said earlier, I'm very much enjoy looking at the planets, and this is, you know, where I spent pretty much last fall, was out looking down on the surface of Mars. And this is why I get a real buzz out of astronomy, out of amateur astronomy. You know, here I am sitting in my garden in southern England, and I'm looking at Mars. Now, I turn the highlighter on, laser pointer. Right, so you should see there. Right, so here I am. Remember, there's a second-hand telescope. That there is Olympus Mons, and I'm catching it as it rotates. You can just see it there. There's a little white line going across there. That's Valles Marineris, only discovered in the 1970s by the space probe, of course. And you've also got, if you look to the south of Olympus Mons, you've got this little white patch. And that's another one of the Tharsis volcanoes. And it's actually a cloud, an orographic cloud forming in the evening as Mars slowly rotates. You can see it extended out there with the winds. And I just find this absolutely amazing that I can sit there in my garden and I can see clouds forming on a volcano on another planet. Yeah, it gives me a real feeling of, really gets the sort of heart going when we do that. And I said to this chap at work, I said, "You wouldn't believe this? I've been outside. I photographed 5 volcanoes in my garden last night." I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He goes, "Oh, sorry, I meant I was photographing volcanoes on another planet last night." And I say, with secondhand kit in the garden observatory, it's quite cool. But as you mentioned earlier, he says, trying to get the slide to move over. Move you over there. I've got too many windows open. I started my astronomical journey quite a few years ago, now getting to be a disappointing number of years, with a much simpler setup. I used a pair of borrowed binoculars to observe comet Hyakutake in 1996 through a pair of 10 by 50 binoculars, and it had this big bright comet crossing the sky. And it made me change from being someone who was interested in science and interested in space into actually become an amateur astronomer, actually become a practical observer. And that was the first sort of serious observation I made with a pair of borrowed binoculars. And it's one of those things, I probably made all the mistakes ever, because, I think I can even remember leaving the outside light on to help me see better at night outside. But you can certainly see it crossing the plough. You have this, there's the handle of the plough going across to Beauties, and there was this little comet with its little stubby tail. So then I was actually working in Canada at the time, near Toronto, near Toronto. And what I got up here, so 4th of March, unfortunately, a major snowstorm has struck, preventing observations of Comet 8. So I've been out looking for it for a while. But yeah, very different weather out there. So absolute blast seeing this comet, finding the plough, working out where the comet was, and then getting my notebook out and sketching it. And that made me, as I say, become a more practical observer, made me get out there and enjoy it. And I use my binoculars. I bought my own pair. I got a little pair of 7 by 35 binoculars. It was that 2nd of August, 1996. And I was outside nearly every clear night for an hour or two. And I learned my constellations. I learned how to star hop, recognize planets. I was out sketching things in my logbook. And that's a recommendation I always make now to people starting out in astronomy, is write it down. It's also great fun reviewing and reading things. I love flicking back through some old notes in years to come. And of course, if you don't write it down, you're soon going to forget it. And we get a lot of people in our club who are interested in astronomy and they want to get it straight into astroimaging, and then realize that it's actually quite hard, because you need to learn your way around the sky. You need to learn how to use equipment. And I say, you don't need that. Just learn your way. Start with a pair of binoculars, a small telescope, whatever it is. Learn your way around the sky first. So I had an absolute blast with my binoculars. They're easy to set up. They were affordable, correct image orientation, and I had an absolutely fabulous time exploring the skies. And that bit when everything's new, when you're finding new things for the first time, it's really exciting. So yeah, so great fun looking through that. And then the following year, so in 1997, we had another bright comet, which was Hale-Bopp, which was absolutely amazing. Here I am, I've upgraded now to a pair of 10 by 50 binoculars. I've obviously splashed the cash, and we could see jets coming off the nucleus through a pair of 10 by 50 binoculars. So I thought, as I was relatively new into astronomy, I've seen 2 comets, and they've both been easily visible to the naked eye and absolutely amazing. And over 20 years later, I now know that the vast majority of comets are, of course, fake smudges. And we were waiting for another great comet like Hale-Bopp for more than 20 years. So last summer, we had Neowise, which was absolutely fantastic, despite I had to set an alarm clock for 2:30 in the morning, which was a bit horrendous. Did you guys get to see Neowise at all? Was it visible? Yep, excellent. So on the first, yeah, it was an amazing sight, wasn't it? So we had, I can't remember, we had 2 or 3 days where it was on the forums and on the social media. There's a brilliant comet in the northern sky, and we just had wet, windy weather. So on the first clear morning we had, it was going to be clear in July, I got up at 2:30 in the morning, and I walked out of our little village, got away from the houses, trees, and the street lights. Now, back then in England, we were still under sort of a bit of restrictions for lockdown. And so there I was walking through the village with my camera tripod on one shoulder and my camera bag on the other. And a police car goes past and he stops, reverses back up. I thought, oh, now I'm going to be in trouble now. And he says, where are you off to? What are you doing at this time of night? And I said, I'm just going to go and photograph that. And I pointed up to the comet, and he goes, oh my God, what's that? I've never seen that. So we actually spent 10 minutes looking at the comet together. So yeah, that was pretty cool. And we had this amazing noctilucent cloud display as well. So here we are in the pre-dawn sky. Remember, this is about 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And the sky is already light, obviously a longer exposure. So you get to see what summer observing is like in the UK. And that's my pencil sketch of through the binoculars of the comet as well. So as you can see, I really love the practical side of astronomy. And even after, over 20 years of observing, I still get a thrill from seeing new sights and familiar sights as well. So I love being at the eyepiece. So we're talking about the weather the other day, and you've seen on my pictures that astronomy in the UK consists of clear skies, obviously all the time. But the biggest factor we have to deal with is the ever-changing weather. Now, you may think it's always nice and sunny and clear here, and maybe if we lived in the middle of Australia, our weather would be a bit more predictable. But we're stuck on a rock in the North Atlantic, and we seem to alternate with periods of nice, kind, clear weather where you can go and observe and image Mars. But then we get a week or 2, 3 weeks where it's just wet and windy, storm after storm blowing in off the North Atlantic. And this BBC weather forecast I printed off, I found it on a forum somewhere, and it really made me laugh because it seems to summarize the challenges we face over here in England. Because you've got cold, wind, sunshine, rain, sleet, and snow showers all on the same day at the same time. So goodness knows what we're going to have. And that's been the problem you have, is that you can have, if it is clear, you've got to grab that opportunity. And if you miss it, you miss it, because there's always work and family commitments, which unfortunately have to come first. And it always seems to be wet and windy when I have some time and energy, and it seems to be horribly clear when I'm busy or tired. And I met someone from Colorado, and he said he can do astronomy on Tuesdays and Saturdays. And I said, well, how can you do that? How can you? He goes, well, we get 300 clear nights a year. And on Wednesday, it's bridge night. And Friday, I go at my wife and says, Tuesdays and Saturdays, it's for astronomy. Whereas I get tireder and tireder and tireder and tireder. And then, oh, thank God for that, it's clouded over again. So we may not have the best weather, but we do have a lot of history over obviously on this side. Do you guys know what this is? Do you know what this is? Yeah, this is the Royal Greenwich Observatory. And if you look up on the side here, it's the prime meridian. And that's the line coming off the telescope there. So if you go in through that building, there's the telescope on its mount, and that's the central line of the pier. And that therefore marks the line between the east and the western hemispheres. So my left foot is in the western hemisphere and my right foot is in the eastern hemisphere. So when we are allowed to travel again and people are allowed back into the country, do come to London, and it's a fantastic place to visit, the Greenwich Observatory. It's got so much history in there. And what I didn't realize, of course, but every time there was a new astronomer royal, they would build their own new telescope, or they'd get more money from the king or from Parliament, and they would then build a new telescope. So if you look here, there's another dome in the background here, and it's got its own meridian line here. And then you had Halley's meridian line was also up there. So there's a number of meridian lines. And it was just, that was when they all agreed that was going to be the new meridian line. Let's go on to the next slide. And it's set in these most fantastic grounds. It's overlooks London. You've got London and the skyscrapers and the city in the background there, and there's the River Thames. And that building in the foreground is the old Royal Navy College. It's now down in Dartmouth on the south coast. And when you look at the pictures inside the museum, Greenwich and London were two separate towns, and there was farms and fields between them. And so, of course, it was a good place for an observatory. Now, of course, London's, that's massive, and it's all grown together. And it was there because there's the River Thames. And so the ships were coming up here to unload goods and what have you. And that was therefore to assist with their timekeeping and to provide, to assist with navigation in the ships, in the Thames and then in overseas as well. They've also got the remnants of Sir William Herschel's telescope. And of course, Sir William Herschel, he discovered the planet Uranus and over 2,500 deep sky objects when he was doing his survey back in the 1700s and 1800s. So this was the remnants of his 40-foot scope. And I thought, as a European, I had to say, imperial units. So it's his great 40-foot telescope, or a 1.2 meter diameter. It's a 48-inch mirror, or a 1.2 meter diameter mirror. So definitely not a grab and go telescope. And you realize just how big this is when you realize that's people down there, and there's the observer on here. So it's this whole team of people. And you can tell they obviously built ships because it looks like ship architecture, with ropes and pulleys and what have you. And definitely not grab and go when you consider today's Dobsonian mounts. So with this telescope, he discovered 2 moons of Saturn. He discovered Enceladus and Mimas. And at the time, it was by far the biggest telescope in the world. And it actually became a little tourist attraction, and it was appearing on maps. But unfortunately, a few decades later, all the wood was rotting away. So it's actually decommissioned by his son, Sir John Herschel, when he came back from South Africa. And this is all that remains, is that little metal section down, which was the base and the mirror cell. All that remains of that famous telescope. And this is how we went down to Greenwich. We caught the boat from Westminster and travelled down towards Greenwich. And this is why I love visiting. I live a couple of hours drive away from London, out in the countryside. But this is why I love visiting London, because you have this real mix. You've got, modern skyscrapers, modern city life, but yet you've got all this old wonderful history, old sailing boats and Tower Bridge. So it's all mixed together as you go down to Greenwich. And then we passed, this is the Tower of London, which was the old castle in London. And they made a real highlight because that's Traitor's Gate. So those people who were found guilty of treason, that's where they were brought to await their final punishment. So people like Guy Fawkes, who tried to blow up Parliament, I don't think he had a pleasant final few moments while he was in the Tower of London. So you're going down to Greenwich, go down to the observatory, and you get to pass all this wonderful history on the way, astronomy and sort of world history as well. But that's all fairly modern history. Let's go back a few thousand years further. Now, this is a really old observatory. And this is where it's about 50 minutes drive away from my house is Stonehenge. And the hardest thing about taking this picture was trying to get a picture without any tourists in the way. And of course, it's a World Heritage site, so it's always very busy. But even in the background, you still got lots of people wandering around. It took me ages to get that picture, just to wait for a gap when there was no one around. And unfortunately, you're not allowed inside the stone circle itself. It's to protect the grass and to protect the stones themselves from damage. But luckily, we had in our astronomy club, one of the members worked at Stonehenge, and he organised a tour inside the stone circle itself. And there were still tourists inside there as well. And actually, it was far more impressive being inside the stones than it was outside, because you realise just how big they are when you stand next to them. And these stones actually come from Wales, which is a few hundred miles away. And they bought all of those stones. And obviously, don't forget, the foundations are a few feet down into the ground as well. And they had no mechanisation, no roads, nothing. They bought them all stone after stone from Wales and set them up in a field in Wiltshire. And yes, there are an awful lot of tourists at Stonehenge. And of course, pandemic withstanding, I imagine they're all gearing up for the solstice, because we get the solstice next month, summer solstice, when the sun comes up over the centre stone, and they'll all be gearing up for that. So I'm not quite too sure how that's going to work. And there's a joke about a tourist visiting Stonehenge, because Stonehenge is actually alongside a sort of busy main road that runs from London down to the West Country. And they were complaining it was such a shame that the ancients built Stonehenge right next to this busy main road. So further away up the road from us, a bit further up again, is another Neolithic site called Avebury. So we're going to leave the tourists, we'll leave the main road behind. Now, I gave a talk a few years ago up here at Wiltshire Astronomy Society. And one of their members, who's a very keen photographer, noticed that the space station was due to transit across the face of the moon after the talk, and it would be visible from Avebury. So we headed up after the talk, a little group of us, and where are we? So that's me down in Salisbury, and then there's Stonehenge near the town of Amesbury, and then we carried on up to Avebury up there. And there was the transit map as well. And that's my DSLR set up with a telephoto lens. A very clear sky, but really windy. And ironically, it was actually clear. Normally it's raining when there's something interesting to see in the skies in England. And it was amazing because we were surrounded by those big stones that you saw earlier in this Neolithic stone circle, watching a obviously very modern space station transit across the moon. So here we have this real contrast with the ancient site, and yet watching the space station with our cameras over that. It's a really atmospheric place to be watching it. Now, I did make a recording of this, so hopefully it's going to come through for you now. How do I play this? Let's come off laser pointer mode. There we go. Right. So you should see a white dot going across the face of the moon, and that was the space station built in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, transiting across the face of the moon, as seen from a 10,000-year-old Neolithic site. I gave this talk a while ago. I actually got a second video. Let's jump to the next slide. And what I did is I put little arrows next to it just to make them easier to see. And I gave this talk up at one of the primary schools, and I had to explain to one of the little children that the space station doesn't really have an arrow next to it when it goes across the sky. I'd had to draw that in afterwards. So that's the space station there going across it. So really wonderful to be seeing this from a Neolithic stone circle. So the other thing we have in the UK, I mean, like you guys do as well, we were talking earlier about star parties. We have our star parties in the UK as well. And as you can imagine, we have several small star parties, numerous small ones, and a handful of bigger star parties as well. And these two pictures were taken at Kellingheath, which is the biggest UK star party. It's a couple of hours north of London. And of course, we didn't have any last year, with the shutdown and the government restrictions, and April's this year was cancelled too. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed for October this year that we can actually get together again. And it's reasonably good skies. It's not super, super good, but it's nice and dark. So on the left there is my friend Dave. So put the laser pointer back on. There's Dave with his 6-inch daub, and I think he's sketching something there. He's working his way through the Herschel 400. And luckily we were camped next to this person. He had two 6-inch Apo binos with the little mirror system, so you can put two telescopes together and use them as a binocular. So that's what I really like about going to star parties, of course, because you get this, we bring our own gear, but of course you get to look through everybody else's gear as well. But you can see we had some clear skies in the left-hand picture, but we've gone back to normal on this side. Now there's another star party up in the north of England called Kielder, which is right up nearly on the Scottish border. And there, the weather can be very different indeed, and leaves a little bit to be desired. I look at it, I think, oh my God, could you imagine waking up, eyepieces floating down into the river? And that's the problem with UK astronomy, as I was saying earlier, is you can never guarantee the weather. You get this beautiful dark side, but it doesn't matter if it's dark, because of course, if it's cloudy all the time, you never get a chance to observe. So I actually prefer to come across to your side of the water. And every few years I save up the pennies and save up my holiday and come to the winter star party in Florida. And I'm amazed because I drive an hour and a half to London. I sit on the plane for however many hours it takes. I watch movies, drink a gin and tonic. And when I get there, I speak to people who've driven for days from Montreal, from Seattle. I just sit there and I know I traveled a long way, but in terms of effort, it's obviously very easy. It's certainly not an arduous journey. People drive for a couple of days, just changing seats all the time, just to burn it down from further north. But you guys do get some pretty interesting weather there in the tropics. And I thought, oh my God, I've just left the UK weather and I've arrived in Florida and this is what we're going to get as well. But it all drained away pretty quickly. So yeah, it was, oh my God, I've brought the UK weather with me. But you do get some amazing skies out there. And it's, of course, coming across, it's really pleasant. And the first time I was there, I set my camera up down by the shoreline and we were looking, I thought, oh no, look, there's cloud coming in off the sea. It's all clouding over. And the guy I was observing this, he goes, "No, you idiot." He says, "That's not cloud. That's the Milky Way rising above the sea." And there it was, absolutely amazing. Scanning through that with binoculars and telescopes. So I come by that with my notebook full of sketches. I've got my camera card full of images, absolutely exhausted after all that. But the real highlight for me, because of course I was saying earlier, we're up at 51 degrees north, is we can't see all this stuff from up here. So this is looking again south towards that. The nearest light pollution when you're on the Florida Keys is Havana, which is about 90 miles to the south across the water. And of course, we can't see this from up here. So you've got Centaurus A, the galaxy, you've got Omega Centauri, or as they called it, oh my God, Centauri. We have the Southern Cross, we have Eta Carina, and there's my binoculars set up there. So you've got all this wonderful stuff, which we just can't see because it's the Earth's in the way, it's below the horizon for us. And that's my sketch over a few nights. I hope that's coming through okay. It's a bit blurry on my screen now. So that's Eta Carina, which was I observed over several nights in 2017. So we talked earlier about the sort of the weather not being predictable in the UK. So we actually have a dark sky site near us, which is relatively free from light pollution. We've got a lot of towns and villages near us, so it is fairly light polluted, but it's certainly the best skies. And it's a place called Salisbury Plain. And as you can see, they've got fantastic horizon. It's nice and clear. The only downside is it's where the army, the British Army, does a lot of its training and pre-deployment training as well. So you're only allowed to set up in certain places because, of course, they don't want us being around while they're firing and driving vehicles. So a pretty dark site, reasonably dark, and obviously good horizons as well. And there's a bunch of us from our astronomy club who meet up as and when the skies allow. And that's what I like about having this sort of dark sky sort of half an hour away from us, is that, if the sky is good and the weather is kind, we can just meet up and observe rather than going to a dedicated star party. So we set up to observe. That's someone getting their equipment ready. And we were we started off watching, that's the conjunction of Venus and Jupiter. And it was actually amazing to have these two planets in the same field of view. And as they set, it slowly got dark. So people were getting their cameras and they were imaging, and dust covers were being taken off telescopes all ready for observing. So on the edge of this military land, beautiful dark sky site, and all of a sudden, Saving Private Ryan started, and there was flares and shouting and smoke and gunfire and vehicles clashing around. We couldn't see any of this because, of course, it was dark for us. All we could see were these flares. So we'd gone to this beautiful dark site, and obviously it wasn't very dark there with all that activity going on. So we actually had to go home early. So yeah, we had to be careful next time to make sure that we don't set up and observe next to where they're actively firing. Okay, I'm going to move on to another topic now, which is, have any of you heard of the town of Winchcombe? No? So this is a good one. So we had a talk from a chap who's a meteor observer, and I've borrowed a few of his stories. And so there's a town of Winchcombe, and I hadn't heard of it until February earlier this year. So it's a town in Gloucestershire, a few hours north again, a couple of hours north of where I am. And you'll see this young lady is looking at a rock, and that's the important part. So on the night of the 28th of February, there was a fireball seen over southern England. And Richard Fleet, he's an astronomer near here up in Newbury. He's one of these real meteor observers, but he's got these cameras set up on his house. He's got 3 cameras looking in different directions. And it picked up this bright meteor. And there were other people who've got similar meteor cameras set up on their roofs as well. And because if you had 2 or 3 cameras all looking in different directions, you can then triangulate where the meteor came in through the sky. Now, what we need to be looking at is as the meteor comes in, here it comes, it's obviously on the loop. There's 3 little bits come off just at the end, just there. Now, those 3 remnants were still glowing through the atmosphere. And because it was clear and because they've been able to triangulate the fall, the scientists at the Natural History Museum managed to predict the fall area. And we were lucky because the UK was in lockdown at the time, so you weren't allowed to travel. So the collectors weren't permitted to travel to see if they could find the fragments, but the scientists were. So the call went out on the local media for, if anyone did find any fragments, to report them. And this family, the following morning, got up and found this on their driveway. And because they heard about it on the local news, they called the telephone number, and they actually donated the samples, this asteroid material, to the scientists at the Natural History Museum. And it's a surprisingly rare carbonaceous chondrite, which is only a few meteorites of this type. It's one of the rarer types of, and that's a close-up of it there. That was what they found on their driveway the following morning. Now, the scientists were obviously looking around the nearby fields, and they were trying to find some as well. And luckily, it's saying because we were in lockdown, the collectors weren't allowed to travel. So these scientists and graduate students were actually searching the nearby fields, and they were looking for dark, elongated rocks like the ones you got there. Now, this area apparently has a lot of sheep farms. So apparently there were a lot of false positives as they looked for dark, black, elongated rocks 2 or 3 inches long. So what I want to do is contrast what these people found in their driveway and then in the sheep field with this picture. So I assume you're familiar with this picture. Now, this is the amazing OSIRIS-REx, which was launched a few years ago. It's traveled across to the asteroid belt. It's not really landed because you can't really land on Bennu, but it's gone down to the surface, fired nitrogen, and it's collected this dust and pebbles, a few from the surface of Bennu. So here is a mission. This is collecting at most a few tens of grams at a cost of $800 million. And it won't return until 2023. And then in a very British way, 300 grams is collected from a residential driveway and a sheep field and donated to the Natural History Museum. It just strikes me as a very British way to do our science. We don't have to do $800 million missions to the asteroid belt. It just turns up in someone's field. And when Richard was giving us the talk, he was saying it was so lucky. The one we had clear skies so that people could see the fall. That enabled the landing area to be calculated. There was a government-enforced lockdown at the time, so there were no collectors were allowed to, come and pick up the samples to sell them on. And actually, the weather remained kind for the next few days, so they could collect all these samples before, the samples started deteriorating, before you had rain or water or biological activity. So it just made me laugh because there we are. We've got 300 grams of asteroid material turned up on our doorstep. As opposed to OSIRIS-REx, which has a handful that won't return for the next few years. So I hope you enjoyed the talk and you have some appreciation now of UK amateur astronomy. I do try and write and publish pictures as and when I can, and you're welcome to have a look at those there. I've put some of them up. My links are now split between my domain name, I see, and my personal name as well. But I'm on Facebook and Instagram, and I put some videos up on YouTube every now and then. So please do reach out after the talk. It'd be lovely to catch up with you. And I'm looking at the time. I'm going to draw to a close. I'm happy to take any questions or points you want to discuss afterwards. So thank you very much for having me.
Well, thank you, Mark. That was really interesting, and we really appreciate you staying up late to talk to us. That was I'm looking forward to the opportunity to go back to the UK sometime, and I'll definitely hit up Greenwich. We did have one question from Matt, and I didn't really understand the context, so I'll see if he'd like to ask that.
He answered it. It was the picture with the noctiluminescent clouds.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, I think Doug just posted one.
Yeah.
About,
ask it. So I know the light pollution I've seen is pretty bad over there. How do you manage your light pollution over there?
Oh, I wish we did. We manage our light pollution by putting bloody more lights up everywhere. We're very good at managing it. We've got loads. It's one of the things the government, they talk about it. Everyone's aware of it, but they put another 1,000 houses up on a new town. The light pollution goes up. It's ridiculous. But I presume you're in exactly the same position as we are. That
Yes,
everyone
we are.
talks about and says, it's bad for the environment and insects and people's health, but no one really seems to do anything about it. There's talk and interest, and a bit like we were saying earlier, the only thing you can do is put a camera on the eyepiece, or travel, put some gas in the tank, and drive to a dark sky site.
That's our solution.
Yeah, which isn't the right solution, is it?
Right.
And we've got there's lots of military stuff. We've got the Salisbury plane stuff up the road, and you go past some of these military garrison places, and there's no one there, and the whole car park's lit up. The front room is all lit up, and you're like, why are we? It's taxpayers' money just going up into the sky. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir.
You are. Great talk.
Mark, question on just in general thinking about astronomy or equipment. First of all, love the C11. I've got a C11, so which I also bought secondhand. So
all the best people, isn't that right, Mike?
Yes, exactly. So hey, all the cool cats have 11-inch cats. But I'm just curious. It seems like in the U.S. we do tend to get, again, this is all pre-COVID, but most people seem to be able to get, equipment. Shipping isn't too difficult, so there's never been that sort of problem. If we want equipment, obviously, if we, it's as long as you've got the money to pay for it, you can usually get it. How does do you find being in Europe, access to either some of the manufacturers from China, does that seem to be more difficult? Are there other manufacturers? How does that seem to be compared to maybe what you've heard and seen on the forums as far as us getting
so I
equipment?
think we're suffering. I mean, not just in astronomy things. All the world production seems to have slowed down. They're talking on the news about house building has slowed down because people just physically can't get hold of bricks and wood, to build houses. And it's the same with astronomy. If you want to buy a new telescope, you can get your credit card out, but you might be waiting 2 or 3 months now for your telescope. Was it that boat that got stuck in the Suez Canal? Did you see that on the news?
Yes.
I thought, I bet that's my telescope at the back. But and of course we've had I don't want to get into politics, but we've left the EU, so Britain's now aside, and it's causing a right mayhem. If you order stuff from European manufacturers, European dealers, you've now got to pay tax, and there's import implications as well. So that's put a bit of a spanner in the works. But everything's stuck with COVID. The Chinese aren't making stuff, so therefore they can't ship it around the world. And the one thing I really noticed when I went to the Winter Star Party is how much the telescopes are bigger in America than they are in. I don't know if that's a British thing, maybe in Europe, where the weather's better. It is worth having a 20, 30-inch Dob or something like that. But the telescope, a 20-inch Dob here is pretty big. So the telescopes are definitely bigger on your side. But the eyepieces are on the right side of the road. That's the other real difference.
Yeah, I think we had another question from Matt. How did COVID affect interest in your astronomy club, or just in astronomy in general? Have you noticed either, a decrease in interest or an uptick?
Yeah, so it's one of those weird ones because we've had more people now coming to our online meetings than we did coming to the face-to-face meetings. And I think that's just because it's maybe easier to travel if people have got young families or they've worked late. It's easier just to dial in, and rather than having to travel to the club. So that's been a good side. And then, of course, people have been stuck at home. So there has been an increase in, I don't know, people bird watching and all that sort of thing, and photographing and telescopes. We just got to see whether it's a bit like when we had that sudden surge in interest in Halley's comets, and it sort of petered out a year or two later, whether it really is going to stay into thing. But we've got plans. The government now is, in June, we come out of full, there's going to be no restrictions, subject to them actually meeting all the milestones. So we can go back to face-to-face meetings when the darker skies come back. So we're hoping to turn that interest into membership, and keep fingers crossed that we can build on that momentum that people have had. But from a personal point of view, because of course, if we got told if you could work from home, you should work from home, you shouldn't be traveling. So my wife and I and the kids, when the schools were shut, we've been stuck at home. And I sort of get to the end of the day and I think, oh no, another Zoom meeting. I don't want, I've been online all day. And so there is kind of that, you can get a bit zoomed out, but it's worth it. So fingers crossed that, COVID will have a benefit, because it's been a pretty weird year.
Yeah, we've seen a similar growth and interest in our club since we had to move to virtual meetings.
We're having a debate now about what. Sorry, I was talking across you, Steve. Go on.
No, I was just saying. Hopefully that renewed or that new interest will hold up once we resume our face-to-face meetings. Hopefully in a few months.
Yeah, so we've got this debate at the moment because I'm the secretary of our little group, and we've got this debate because we've got more members who are interested in meeting online, but yet we want to get back to being social and being observing. So how are we going to do some sort of hybrid of, can we meet in the hall and still be able to broadcast to the people who can't make it?
Yeah,
and therefore we've got to hire the room yeah. Well, when you crack it and work out how to do it, let us know.
Our imaging group is going through that now. The majority of the imaging group wants, at the very least, a hybrid meeting where they have both online and in person. But the logistics of trying to do the online part during the indoor meeting, there's a little bit of equipment involved, and of course there's Wi-Fi, and so it's caused quite a quandary. And I think we're going to face that with our indoor meetings too, is trying to do hybrid where we do both.
Yeah, it doesn't matter where in the world you are, the problems are still the same, aren't they?
Yeah.
But anyway, imagers love that because it's buying more equipment and trying to get it to work, and they've got to have drivers to talk to this.
Yep. Hey, but if you can see and take pictures of clouds forming over volcanoes on a planet 40 million, 50 million, 180 million miles away, then being able to do a hybrid meeting shouldn't be that much of a challenge. Yeah. So.
And we're getting really excited because we've got a partial solar eclipse on the 10th of June. So we're trying to just keep up, because there was a lunar eclipse, wasn't there, for you guys on your side? Did you miss it?
It was very difficult to see. By the time the moon was, by the time the eclipse started, really the sun had started to come out. I couldn't really see a difference. I've had other people tell me that they could, but I really couldn't. I don't know if anyone else did on the call here, but I couldn't really tell the difference.
Yeah, we were just in bad position.
Yeah, just on the wrong side.
Yeah,
we missed it entirely. But we do get the partial solar eclipse, when it goes back to being new in 2 weeks' time. So we're looking forward to that, and hopefully that'll get a bit of interest as well. But of course,
going to be
a year or two.
You guys,
Sorry,
Will it be near sunset for you guys? I know it's gonna be
No,
sunrise for us.
Sure,
It's
midday.
it's middle of the morning. It's like 10 o'clock in the morning.
Oh,
So for this, yeah, I don't know what time it starts on your side, but by the time it's gone a few thousand miles across, it's later in the morning. But of course, whatever it was 18 months ago, we'd have gone into a school. We'd have rung up a few schools and said, do your kids want to come and have a look at this? We've got the local press out. But of course, you can't do that now. The last thing schools want is visitors turning up,
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Right.
Now
We
you've
have
got an
any other
upcoming.
questions?
Yeah, Mark, you've got an upcoming eclipse journey or trip, right?
Oh, so we were talking about that, weren't we? Because you're giving us a talk on the 17 eclipse. Yeah. So our next big one in Europe is 2024. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that all these restrictions have all come to an end, and we've worked out how we can travel post Brexit and all that sort of thing. So yeah, 2024 across Spain that's what I'm planning. Yeah, we all enjoyed watching the news of 2017 when the eclipse went from one coast to the other coast of America.
Oh yeah.
I know. For me, it made me just it was the first time I'd seen a total eclipse, and it was entrancing. I mean, it was amazing. So
Yeah, we were fortunate. We didn't really have to, personally travel. We only had to travel a few hundred miles to be able to see totality.
Yeah,
it's amazing, isn't it?
Fortunate.
Yeah.
We did hear about these people who were stuck in traffic jams for like 12 hours or something.
Yes.
They're in these little towns in the desert, and then 10,000 people suddenly arrived all at the same day.
Yep. Exactly.
Well, if there are not any more questions, I want to once again thank Mark for his time, and it was a really interesting talk, and I hope you have some clear skies this summer.
Yeah, fingers crossed, and you as well. And thanks for having me.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
All right, and we'll be chatting soon, Mark. Thank you.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Right, I'll sign off. Thanks. I'm going to go to bed, and I'll wish you a good evening.